Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special podcast. Today, we're talking about something many people don't see coming: emotional abuse. It isn't always loud or obvious, and sometimes the person hurting you seems kind, calm, or caring. If you've ever felt confused, drained, or like you're walking on eggshells in a relationship, this episode is for you. We'll uncover the quiet signs, the subtle control, and how your own feelings and body are trying to warn you. Stay with me. What we talk about today could help you see the truth and take back your power. Abuse doesn't always announce itself with shouting, threats, or obvious cruelty. In fact, some of the most damaging abuse is quiet, subtle, and emotionally disorienting. It shows up in gentle tones, thoughtful expressions, and words that sound reasonable on the surface but leave you feeling small, confused, or ashamed afterward. This is why so many people stay in emotionally abusive situations for years without realizing what's happening. They're not blind, they're being slowly conditioned. When abuse whispers, it's harder to identify because it doesn't match the image we were taught to fear. We expect abuse to look violent or explosive. We don't expect it to look like someone who appears calm, intelligent, and emotionally evolved. We don't expect it to come from someone who says they love us, who seems considerate in public, who is admired by others. So when something feels wrong, we turn the question inward instead of outward. We assume the discomfort must be our fault. This kind of abuse hides in sarcasm framed as humor, in concern that feels controlling, in advice that subtly undermines your confidence. It hides in the way your feelings are acknowledged but never truly respected. You're heard, but nothing changes. You're validated in words, but dismissed in action. Over time, this creates an internal split. You feel hurt, but you also feel guilty for feeling hurt. Because the harm isn't obvious, it becomes easy to minimize. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You focus on the good moments. You compare your situation to worse stories and convince yourself you should be grateful. Meanwhile, your sense of self erodes quietly. Your intuition grows faint. Your voice becomes cautious. That's the danger of abuse that whispers. It doesn't break you all at once. It wears you down slowly, patiently, until questioning the treatment feels more uncomfortable than enduring it. And by the time you realize something is deeply wrong, you've already been taught to doubt your own perception of reality. And this is where it deepens. Because once abuse learns how to whisper, it needs a way to make sure you never turn up the volume. That's where confusion comes in, not as a side effect, but as a strategy. You don't stay because you're convinced everything is perfect. You stay because nothing is clear enough to leave. One day you feel hurt, the next day they're kind. One moment you're sure something crossed a line, the next moment you're told it didn't happen that way. Your emotional ground is constantly shifting, like standing on sand that moves just as you try to steady yourself. This confusion isn't accidental. It keeps you busy questioning yourself instead of questioning them. You replay conversations, searching for the exact moment you might have misunderstood. You analyze your tone, your words, your reactions. Meanwhile, they remain certain, composed, unwavering. Their confidence begins to feel like truth, and your uncertainty starts to feel like a flaw. What makes this especially damaging is that the confusion is wrapped in logic and calmness. There's no yelling, no dramatic denial, just a quiet rewriting of events. That's not what I meant. You're taking it the wrong way. I never said that. And because it's delivered softly, you're left feeling embarrassed for even bringing it up. Over time, you stop trusting your memory. You stop trusting your emotions. You start asking for permission to feel what you feel, and that's the point. Confusion keeps you dependent. It keeps you reaching outward for clarity instead of inward for truth. When nothing feels solid, you cling to the person who seems most certain, even if they're the one destabilizing you. That's how emotional abuse tightens its grip. Not by force, but by fog. Not by domination, but by making you doubt your own inner compass. And the more confused you become, the easier it is for someone else to define reality for you, one quiet correction at a time. And once confusion has done its job, the abuse no longer needs to defend itself. It simply disappears in plain sight. This is where covert narcissism thrives, not in chaos, but in invisibility. There are no dramatic scenes, no obvious villains, just a person who looks reasonable, even admirable, while you slowly start to look like the problem. Because when the harm is subtle, the burden of proof falls on you. You're the one trying to explain a feeling that doesn't have a single clear incident attached to it. You're the one saying something feels off, while they calmly respond with logic, maturity, and emotional restraint. And to anyone watching from the outside, they seem grounded. You seem emotional. That's how invisibility works. They don't need to attack you openly when they can quietly frame you as unstable. Your reactions become the focus, not what provoked them. Your tears are evidence of your weakness, not your pain. Your need for clarity is labeled insecurity, and every time you try to speak up, you walk away feeling more exposed, more embarrassed, more alone. What makes this especially painful is the isolation, because you start realizing that if you tried to explain this to someone else, you wouldn't even know where to begin. There's no single moment you can point to and say, this is it. There's just a pattern, one that lives in tone, timing, omission, and subtle dismissal. And patterns are hard to defend when the other person is skilled at appearing innocent. So you retreat, you stop sharing, you carry it quietly. And the more invisible the abuse becomes, the more visible your distress appears. That's the cruel irony. The person causing the harm fades into the background while you stand alone under the spotlight, questioning your sanity. And that's exactly where covert abuse wants you, isolated, self-doubting, and unsure whether what you're experiencing even counts as harm at all. And this is why it takes so long to recognize what's really happening, because the damage isn't loud enough to set off alarms. It doesn't arrive as a single unforgettable moment. It arrives in increments. Quiet, calculated, almost unnoticeable at first. Emotional abuse like this isn't about explosions, it's about erosion. Day by day, something inside you gets worn down. Not shattered, just thinned. A little less confidence here, a little more hesitation there. You don't wake up one morning feeling broken, you wake up feeling unsure. Unsure of your reactions, unsure of your worth, unsure of whether you're allowed to take up the same space you used to. It works the way water works on stone. No single drop is powerful enough to be blamed, but over time, the shape is changed forever. Each dismissal, each subtle correction, each moment where your feelings are acknowledged but never honored, it all adds up. And because nothing feels severe on its own, you keep telling yourself to endure it, to be patient, to be understanding, to try harder. Meanwhile, the version of you that once spoke freely begins to disappear. You start choosing silence over honesty because it feels safer. You start second-guessing your instincts because trusting them has only led to conflict or withdrawal. You adapt, not because you're weak, but because adaptation feels like survival. This is the cruel brilliance of emotional erosion. There's no clear line where you can say, this is where it went wrong. There's only a gradual loss of self that happens so slowly you don't notice it until you look back and realize how much of yourself you've given up just to keep the peace. And by the time you sense the depth of the damage, you are not asking how to leave, you're asking how to feel like yourself again. That's when you realize this was never about love going wrong. It was about power being applied quietly, patiently, until your sense of self wore thin enough to be controlled. And somewhere in that quiet erosion, a dangerous belief takes root. The idea that love is supposed to feel like this, that instability is normal, that tension is intimacy, that if you're exhausted, it must mean you care deeply. But real love doesn't hollow you out. It doesn't keep you guessing where you stand or who you're allowed to be today. Love is meant to feel grounding, not perfect, not effortless, but steady. It should give your nervous system room to breathe. You should feel more like yourself in its presence, not less. When love is healthy, disagreements don't threaten your sense of safety. Communication doesn't feel like a test you're constantly failing. There's space for repair, not punishment. In emotionally abusive dynamics, chaos replaces that sense of grounding. You're always adjusting, always monitoring moods, always anticipating reactions. Peace becomes conditional, something you earn by staying quiet or agreeable. And when calm finally arrives, it feels fragile, temporary, like glass that could shatter with one wrong word. That's not connection. That's hypervigilance. Your body feels the difference, even if your mind tries to justify it. In healthy love, your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, your thoughts slow down. In abusive love, your body stays braced, even during the good moments. There's an undercurrent of tension, a sense that safety can be withdrawn at any time. This is where many people get stuck, because they confuse intensity with depth. The highs feel meaningful because the lows are so painful. But depth doesn't require destruction. Love doesn't need chaos to be real. It needs consistency. It needs emotional reliability. It needs to feel like a place you can rest, not a storm you're constantly trying to survive. When peace feels unfamiliar, we start distrusting it. We mistake calm for boredom, stability for distance. And that's how emotional abuse rewires your understanding of love, until you have to consciously relearn that feeling safe isn't settling. It's the foundation everything else is meant to stand on. And once peace has been replaced with constant tension, control no longer need S to be loud to be effective. It becomes quiet, subtle, passive, because silence, when used intentionally, can hurt more than words ever could. This is where withdrawal enters, not as a need for space, not as healthy regulation, but as punishment disguised as maturity. You say something that matters to you. You set a boundary, you express hurt, and suddenly the warmth is gone. The connection disappears, messages go unanswered, affection is withheld. The room feels colder, even if nothing is said out loud. And because you've already learned to associate conflict with loss, your body reacts immediately. Anxiety rises, your thoughts race. You wonder what you did wrong. You consider apologizing, not because you were wrong, but because you want the silence to stop. That's not communication, that's conditioning. Passive cruelty works because it leaves no fingerprints. There's no insult to quote, no threat to point to. Just absence, just distance, just the unbearable feeling of being emotionally abandoned while still technically together. And when you finally ask what's wrong, you're met with nothing or I'm fine, delivered in a way that clearly says the opposite. This keeps you trapped in emotional labor that was never yours to carry. You become responsible for repairing a rupture you didn't cause, solving a problem that was never clearly stated. Meanwhile, they get to maintain control without ever appearing aggressive. Healthy adults talk. They clarify, they repair. They don't disappear to make a point. Silence used this way isn't calm, it's coercive. It teaches you that speaking up costs you connection, that honesty leads to isolation, that love is something that can be taken away if you don't behave correctly. And once that lesson sinks in, you don't need to be silenced anymore. You silence yourself. You anticipate the withdrawal before it happens. You stay small to stay connected. And that's how control becomes internal, quiet, invisible, and devastatingly effective. And after enough time living under that kind of quiet control, something shifts inside you. You don't just respond to the silence anymore. You begin organizing your entire existence around avoiding it. This is where shrinking becomes a survival strategy. You start editing yourself before you speak. You rehearse sentences in your head, removing anything that might sound too emotional, too direct, too honest. You swallow reactions in real time. You let things slide that once would have mattered to you, not because they stopped hurting, but because the cost of addressing them feels too high. You walk on eggshells so carefully that you forget what solid ground feels like. Your needs become negotiable, your boundaries feel inconvenient, your voice feels dangerous, and slowly, without realizing it, you abandon parts of yourself just to keep the connection intact. This isn't a conscious choice, it's adaptation. When love feels conditional, the nervous system learns to prioritize safety over authenticity. So you become agreeable, low maintenance, easy. You pride yourself on being understanding, even as you're quietly disappearing inside that understanding. What's heartbreaking is how invisible this loss is to others, and sometimes even to you. On the outside, you look calm, reasonable, mature. On the inside, you're exhausted from carrying everything alone. You miss the version of yourself who laughed louder, spoke freely, took up space without apologizing for it. And the more you shrink, the more the dynamic seems to work. There's less conflict, less tension, more surface level peace. But it comes at a cost that compounds over time, because when you silence yourself long enough, you don't just lose your voice, you lose your sense of who you are. That's the quiet tragedy of emotional abuse. It doesn't just hurt you, it reshapes you. It teaches you that love requires self-erasure, that connection is earned through compliance. And by the time you notice how small you've become, you're no longer sure how to expand again without everything falling apart. And once you've learned to shrink, to edit yourself, to stay quiet for the sake of connection, the final shift happens almost without resistance. You stop trusting yourself altogether. This is where gaslighting takes full hold, not as a dramatic lie, but as a slow replacement of your inner authority. You notice it in the smallest moments. You feel hurt, but before the feeling can fully form, you question it. You remember a conversation clearly, but when it's denied, your certainty dissolves. You tell yourself you must be mistaken, emotional, tired, misremembering, and eventually you don't even need them to correct you anymore. You do it for them. The most destabilizing part, because your internal compass starts pointing outward. Instead of asking, how do I feel about this? You ask, how would they see this? Instead of trusting your instincts, you look for their reaction to decide what's real. Their version of events becomes the safer one to believe, because believing yourself has only ever led to conflict, withdrawal, or shame. Gaslighting doesn't erase your reality overnight. It makes your reality feel unreliable. It turns your emotions into suspects and your memories into loose evidence. And the more you doubt yourself, the more dependent you become on the person who keeps redefining the truth. You start seeking reassurance for things you once knew. You over-explain. You justify. You ask permission to feel what you're already feeling. And beneath all of it is a quiet fear that if you trust yourself and you're wrong, you will lose the relationship entirely. This is how emotional abuse cuts the deepest. Not by convincing you of a lie, but by convincing you that you can't trust your own truth. And when that happens, the most powerful voice in your life is no longer your own. It's theirs. And even when your mind has been trained to doubt itself, there is one place the truth still lives: your body. Long before you have the language for what's happening, your body starts keeping score. You feel it in the tightness that never quite leaves your chest, in the knot in your stomach before a simple conversation, in the exhaustion that follows even neutral interactions. You feel it in how your heart races when their mood shifts, in how your shoulders tense when you hear their footsteps or see their name light up your phone. This isn't weakness. This is awareness trying to break through. The body doesn't analyze, it doesn't rationalize, it responds. And when you live in emotional uncertainty for too long, your nervous system stays on high alert. Even during calm moments, there's an undercurrent of unease because your body has learned that safety is temporary. You might tell yourself you're just anxious by nature, that you're overthinking, that stress is coming from work or life or anything else you can name. But notice this, how your body feels in their absence versus their presence. Notice the difference between being alone and being with someone who claims to love you. Relief is information. Your body reacts because it recognizes patterns your mind is still trying to excuse. It remembers every silence, every dismissal, every moment you had to brace yourself emotionally. And it carries that memory forward, warning you before your conscious thoughts catch up. This is why emotional abuse is so draining. You're not just managing a relationship, you're constantly regulating your nervous system. You're surviving, not living. And no amount of logic can talk your body out of what it knows. Listening to these signals isn't dramatic, it's self-respect. Your body isn't betraying you, it's trying to protect you. And the moment you stop fighting those signals, the moment you stop calling them flaws, you get closer to the truth you've been circling all along. Something here is not safe, and it never was. And this is where hope begins, because awareness is the first crack in the walls that have held you captive. Once you start listening to your body, to your intuition, to the quiet voice inside that's been doubted for so long, you begin to see clearly. Naming what has been happening is not just an intellectual exercise, it's an act of liberation. When you can put words to the erosion, the confusion, the invisibility, the passive cruelty, the shrinking, the gaslighting, and the bodily alarm bells, something shifts. The fog lifts just for you to recognize that none of this is your fault, that the chaos, the doubt, the exhaustion, the anxiety, they are symptoms of someone else's manipulation, not evidence of your inadequacy. This is the moment that begins reclaiming your power. Awareness allows you to place responsibility where it belongs. You begin to understand that the pattern wasn't love, it wasn't care, it was control. And you start seeing it in a larger context, not as a reflection of your worth, but as a reflection of their inability to truly connect, respect, or honor another human being. That understanding gives clarity, and clarity gives choice. Because once you see it for what it is, you no longer have to endure it quietly. You no longer have to shrink to survive. You can set boundaries, demand respect, or walk away. You can begin rebuilding the parts of yourself that were silenced. You can trust your instincts again. You can honor your body's signals instead of questioning them. You can reclaim your voice, your space, your energy, your life. And while the road to healing may feel long, it is real. Every small recognition, every boundary, every moment you listen to yourself is a step toward freedom. Awareness doesn't just end the abuse, it starts the process of becoming fully, unapologetically, and beautifully yourself again. It reminds you that you deserve safety, respect, and love that feels like home, not a constant test. And that truth, once embraced, is unstoppable. And so, after walking through this journey together, I want you to pause and feel what we've uncovered. Not as a lecture, but as a mirror reflecting your own experience. You've seen how quiet whispers can wound, how confuse, ion can erode certainty, how invisibility can isolate, and how emotional control can slowly reshape a soul. You felt how your body remembers what your mind has been told to ignore, and how listening to those signals is the first step toward reclaiming your truth. This isn't theoretical, it's real, it's human, and it's lived by countless people who've survived relationships that made them doubt themselves. But here's the part that changes everything. Awareness isn't just a moment of recognition, it's a spark. It's the spark that reminds you that none of this was your fault, that the love you endured, which demanded your silence, your shrinking, and your constant self doubt, was never true love. It was control masquerading as care. And once you name it, once you acknowledge it, you can no longer let it define your life. The power isn't just in walking away, it's in the reclamation of yourself. Every thought you trust, every feeling you honor, every boundary you set is a declaration you are worthy of respect, safety, and love that feels like home. And the beauty of this journey is that it starts small, a single acknowledgement, a single boundary, a single I see myself and I matter moment. Those moments grow, they compound, they build courage that no subtle manipulation can undo. So if you've stayed with me this far, know this, the rest of the story, your story, is yours to write. You are capable of seeing clearly, of standing firmly, and of loving fully without fear. And every step you take toward your truth is a step toward freedom, toward healing, and toward a life where your voice is never silenced again. Hold on to that, because it's the most powerful force you will ever have, your own unwavering truth.